Okay, so let's move on. First one, okay, and you can raise your hands and tell me, no problem. The female brain is 5 ounces lighter than the male brain. This is responsible for men being naturally better mathematicians. Is that a myth or a fact? Myth, no? Okay. There are few top women scientists at elite universities because of issues of intrinsic aptitude, which comes from a biological difference between women and men. Fact or myth? How many think it's a myth? How many think it's a fact?
Did you understand?
Did you understand what I said?
Not take 1 more minute to read it.
Yes, and then respond. So intrinsic aptitude as in they have that within them. Okay. And that's because women and men are biologically different, and men have a certain aptitude within them. Because of that, there are more men scientists than women scientists. Is that true or false? False, huh? Myth, very strongly she's saying. I like that. Okay, then the third one, because now I'm going to come back and ask you, how do you know? Because as a scientist, we cannot just say, look, we have to have proof. Okay, women were initially barred from the US space program. So they were not allowed to go into the US space program due to concerns around premenstrual syndrome on board the craft. Is that a fact or a myth? So they were very worried that women will have PMS. Okay, they'll have PMS, and so there will be a problem, and they may not be able to perform well. So they shouldn't come on board the US spacecraft. Is that a fact or a myth? It's a fact, that's true. They were actually prevented from, yeah. Our brains are plastic and moldable throughout our lives, reflecting what we do and don't do. That's a myth, huh? I heard her saying it's a myth. But you know what plastic means here? That means flexible. So is it a myth or a fact? Fact, huh? It's a fact. Why? How? See, she said myth, yeah? Myth,
Did you understand?
Flexible and you can learn. So it's actually a fact, okay? And excelling in physics and mathematics requires an innate aptitude that just can't be taught. Agree, huh? Many people are agreeing. What is this? No. Disagree, la? It can easily be taught. I mean, it's not difficult to learn physics and mathematics. You think it is? But that is true. I mean, I agree with you that some subjects don't come as easily as others, but it could be because of many reasons. Namakku chilappo teacher undavum illengil namakku aa subject il athra interest illa angana oru adu undavum. That is very possible, but it's not because of a fundamental problem in your brain. It's not because of that. It is other problems. Okay. All right. So we did pretty well in this, I say. Now let's look at history. Charles Darwin, right, who we all, I mean, we know that he did absolutely important work in the field of evolution, right? But this is what he thought about women. Can you see? You can read? Can you read? Come here, come sit here, because then you can read what's on the screen. It's important to read what's on the screen. So what did he say? He said that there seems to be a problem here between men and women, and they can never be intellectual equals of men. So this is a scientist who said this, right? So it's interesting, no? How even a scientist who's supposed to be objective, unbiased, thought at that time, right? Then we're talking about 1930s India, and this is Kamala Sohoni, who is one of the brightest scientists in the country. And there's this very beautiful book called Lilavati's Daughters. You must read it. It's a small book brought out by DST, and it has stories of Indian women scientists. what they went through, the process, all of that. Very inspiring. So I would definitely recommend that you read the book. You can even get a PDF of it online. Yeah? So how would you describe this way of thinking? Both C.V. Raman, who is again a very, very, very famous and has done brilliant work in physics. So C.V. Raman and Charles Darwin. How would you describe this way of thinking? What is this way of thinking in your mind? What is it? There is a word we use in science, right? Called bias. So it is biased, no? Because you already have a judgment in your head. You're already thinking that, oh, adu three la, avarku pinna varula, math varula, physics varula, and they're not intellectually equal to. But you don't expect a scientist to think like that, right? Because scientists are supposed to be objective, isn't it? Yeah? Okay. Some more pieces of history. Have you, you must have all read the story of Francis Crick and, yeah, and also Rosalind Franklin, yeah? How it was her X-ray crystallography that was used in the discovery of DNA. But you know that her work was not acknowledged, right? And she died before the Nobel Prize was given. So, and they don't give Nobel Prize to posthumous people. So she didn't, but even if she had been alive, people are not sure whether she would have been included in the team. Because there was such a strong bias against women in science. And it continues. Even today we have a lot of issues about women in STEM. Huge issues. And in India there's a lot of work that's being done by this group called Bias Watch India. Lifeofscience.com, and Shobana Narasimhan, she's also doing a lot of work on preparing presentations on where there are prejudices and biases for women in STEM. Okay. So now let's look at this very interesting book that was written by Londa Shiebinger, and she says women were not to be viewed merely as inferior to men, but as fundamentally different from and so incomparable to men. So that was the bias or the prejudice with which research was done. So all the research that was done to prove that there is a difference. So adu namakku, when we get into research itself, you have that bias. But science tells us that we have to be objective and unbiased. So we have to look at every new piece of evidence as new. And what is that piece of evidence telling me? What is this data telling me about this condition? I'm not assuming that this is what this data should tell me. So I have to look at that data afresh, right? I have to see what is the data telling me, what is the image telling me, not what I am imagining the image is telling me. Or I have already decided what result I should get and I am looking for that, right? Okay, so what we were just saying, so what is science is supposed to be the pursuit of truth, not absolute truth, that is philosophy, because there is nothing absolute in science, right? Every day when we discover new things, we change the previous theory, we change our understanding. So science is what is called falsifiable, that is, with new evidence we will change the way we understand something. There is nothing absolute and pure, but our aim as scientists is to seek the truth. What is true at this given point of time, right, about nature. Now in the context of women, what do you think? Has it been a scientific approach so far that we have talked about? Based on the evidence you just read, from Charles Darwin to C.V. Raman, do you think it has been a scientific approach? Not really, isn't it? Yeah. And also we must now find out, we will now go to some evidence and see what is science telling us. Is there a difference between men and women in their brain? Is there a difference in the way women learn and men learn? So let's look at, so you're saying this, but how do you know? What is the scientific basis? What is your evidence? What proof do you have? Have you done research? Have you read about it? നമുക്ക് ഇമോഷണൽ ആയിട്ട് ഒരു റിയാക്ഷൻ ഉണ്ട്, പക്ഷേ അതിൻ്റെ എവിഡൻസ് ഉണ്ടോ നമ്മുടെ കയ്യിൽ? ഇല്ലല്ലോ. നമ്മൾ ന്യൂറോ ഇമേജസ് ഒന്നും കണ്ടിട്ടില്ലല്ലോ, right? And none of us have done evolutionary biology work or endocrinology work or neuroimaging, so we don't know. But people have done, and we will look at some of that evidence. All right. Okay, so when we look at neuroscience, we know that there is a certain difference in the structure of the brain, right? External structure and internal structure. There is a difference for sure. But is it between male and female? That is what we will find out. Then there is also what we talked about, brain plasticity, the ability of the brain to learn, to form new neuronal connections, right? So that is very much there. And also, have you heard about this nature versus nurture thing? That is what you are born with and your environment where you are, where you grow. Family environment, you know, it can be any of that. Your family, your school, your friends, what you eat, how you live, your health status, all that can also affect your brain, right? So that is your nurture, how you are brought up, how you are nurtured, your environment, okay? So is there an impact of that? Then from endocrinology, there is a lot of evidence about hormone-brain connections. In fact, there are some lovely stories about, you know, oxytocin, which is produced when during lactation, right? So now they actually have evidence that when a father is holding the baby and there's an emotional reaction, his oxytocin level goes up, even though he's not breastfeeding the child, right? So there is evidence of, so it doesn't have to be male and female. So by understanding these things, we get a very different understanding of what is a male brain, what is a female brain. Is there anything like that at all or not? Yeah. And then from evolutionary biology also, there is a lot of evidence that there isn't this kind of differentiation. And this, you know, all of you know this, right? Biological sex is separate from gender. Gender is a social condition, because society tells you how you should look if you are a masculine or feminine, right? Which means that it is not defined by nature. Only your biological sex is defined by nature, not your gender. So there is fluidity in the context of gender, but biological sex is what you are born with in terms of your genital organs. But gender is not. So gender is fluid, which is why today we talk about gender fluidity and the need to understand that, because that is something created by society. Now society will tell you, if you are a woman, you must have nice long hair and put flowers in it, right? But if I want to have short hair, right? Or if I want to wear trousers, I may find myself, I may see myself as a woman, but I may want to express myself differently. So gender is what society defines you as, and biological sex is what you are born with, the sexual organs you are born with. So that's important for us to think about in this context. Okay, so let's look at the skull, right? So there is a difference in the size of the skull, there is a difference in the weight of the brain, but you don't look at absolute, because the body size and the body weight of a man and a woman are different. So you have to correct the brain and the cranial size and the brain size to the proportionate to the body, no? Right? So if there is a large built woman, she may have a different, if you look at the ratio, it may be different. So you cannot absolutely say that a male brain is bigger than a female brain. No, you have to relate it to the body weight and the body size. Okay, which is what a lot of people, even, Helen Gardner did a lot of work even in 1888, and she was a school teacher. She fought with Charles Darwin and said that this is not right. So therefore, one is this, how do you interpret data? How do you look at numbers, right? Because already they had decided that a woman was inferior to a man in terms of brain. So this data was very useful, but they didn't do it scientifically. Did you understand the difference between the actual weight versus relative weight. Did you understand? Yeah? Inside the brain, let's go inside the brain now. Now, more recently, because we have a lot of data on imaging, neuroimaging, so we can take photographs of the brain, right? So we can see, right? So there is this Israeli scientist called Daphna Joel. She's done some wonderful work. She's a neuroscientist, okay? And she has compared the male brain to the female brain, and you can see it there, right? Big brain, small brain, thin cortex, thick cortex, but female brain has higher proportion of grey matter. So are women more intelligent? You have to think about that, right? If you take only one thing, because normally, have you heard this? Somebody's got more grey matter, therefore they're more intelligent. We think about grey matter as giving you more intelligence, right? But that's not true, right? So there are all these differences. Some are big in male, some are big in female. So there isn't any such differentiation for us to say specifically. And there are differences in the way the female and the male brain, internal connections are also very different. Okay. So that is one other piece of evidence inside the brain. And so now what a lot of neuroscientists are saying is that the human brain is a mosaic. You know, like not this, but you know those mosaic floors which have different pieces in it, yeah? So the human brain is a mix of both. And in fact, there is nothing like a male brain and female brain. In fact, the difference between two women is more than the difference between a man and a woman in terms of the brain. That is what they found from neuroimaging. So it's not emotional. This is not an emotional response. This is evidence from neuroimaging. Right? So this is what neuroscience is now telling us, and this is in the last, in the 2000s, most of this research has been done. 2010, 2015, beyond that. Because physics, advancements in technology, in neuroimaging has helped us to see the inside of the brain, which we couldn't see earlier. Yeah? And so we know that there is a difference between the brain everywhere, all the way down to the gene, right? But it is a mosaic. That's what we come away with in terms of our evidence, right? And again, like what I was talking just now about neuroimaging, right? So so as you go deeper and deeper, we also find neuroplasticity. Remember, we were talking about plasticity of the brain. So your environment has a huge impact, how you are brought up, in the conditions you are brought up, the exposures you get, who you talk to, the kind of books you read, the kind of food you eat, right? The way you think and how you stimulate your brain. All that also has an impact on the brain development. So you can't, so when you say male brain and female brain, that means you stop the person from developing. In a sense, you say that if you're born with a male brain or you're born with a female brain, that's it, end of story. But that's not true, because increasing neuroscience research is telling us that the brain is very plastic. Whether I'm a man or a woman, depending upon, or of any other, so biologically, if I'm a man or a woman, the kind of exposures I get. So for instance, people say, oh, men read maps better than women. Men have a better sense of direction. But a woman can train herself to read a map better than a man. It's what you're exposed to. It is what you train your brain to do that you can develop new pathways in the brain. So that is also impacting the story of male brain, female brain. Right? So that's another line of evidence that we have. And remember what I told you about the hormones, right? Like they found they've done some experiments with men, women, and biological males and biological females. They've done experiment with, or they have monitored them. So there's a very interesting, I don't know how many of you have thought about this, but the embryo, right? The default blueprint is female. Only 7 weeks after fertilization does testosterone start getting generated. So if you want to really think about, if somebody wants to fight the male-female battle, it starts very early. So I don't know whether you've studied this in human reproduction, but It's only after the first 7 weeks that the testosterone production starts. So till then, every embryo is female.
That's a new information for most.
I heard a lot of yes. I can see where this information is going to be used. Okay, so therefore, with you know, as we understood in 1930s and 1940s, as we understood more and more about hormones, so you know also that women have testosterone, right? You know that, isn't it? So like for instance, women when they go into menopause, the testosterone, because estrogen levels fall, so the ratio of testosterone to estrogen changes, right? And this happens, and in some women, of course, when the estrogen level falls too much, you actually see, you know, small beard formations in some older women. You see that, right? And that's because of this shift in balance that has happened. So testosterone exists in both species. So also these kind of myths, you know, oh, that person is testosterone filled. So you want to say, no, not just male, but you know, females also have that. And so yes, so social activities affect, so that's the example I gave you about that father. When they did this study on the father who was holding the baby and who was literally holding the baby very close, and when they monitored his oxytocin levels, they were high. But when the baby, you know, afterwards, when they monitored, the oxytocin levels were back to the original level. So even social engagements can change hormonal levels. So how can you say that there is a standard level of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, oxytocin? And you know, oxytocin is produced only under certain conditions. But when that father was holding that child with so much emotional connection, his oxytocin levels went up, and they monitored that. So that is very interesting, what the brain endocrine system connection, right? And it's also interesting from many other levels, I think. When we begin to think about how we live our lives, right, how we react to situations, it can affect your endocrine system. If you are calm, if you are balanced, your endocrine system is very different. If you are constantly agitated, it's a different story, right? Anxiety and everything else. Which is also why when you have premenstrual syndromes, or when women enter into menopause, or when you are pregnant, there are all those changes in emotion that happen, because the hormone emotional brain connection is so strong, right? Okay, then there's evolutionary biology. Again, in evolutionary biology also we have data, because normally they thought that, you know, males are promiscuous, they go out and do this, females are passive. But evolutionary biology, and particularly from anthropology, when they studied this indigenous human societies in northern Namibia, they found that it was a very different story, that you do have societies where women dominate and where women go out and hunt, and the men tend and take care of the family. So it is possible. So it's not set in stone. So all this is coming from literature, it's coming from publications. And also, this is a very interesting one about primate research, okay. So what happens is you have chimpanzees and bonobos, right? Chimpanzees were used as the closest to us. But chimpanzees are a very strong masculine society, okay. Bonobos are female headed. But not many people have studied bonobos. It's only when women primatologists went into the field that we understood about bonobos. As long as there were only male primatologists in the field, we only knew stories about chimpanzees. So it's also a function of who is doing the research. How many women are doing research in these areas? So then because then the kind of questions you ask changes, right? So if you want to summarize, we understand that neuroscience, evolutionary biology, hormone studies, neuroimaging is all telling us that the brain is a mosaic, right? That's one very important thing. The other thing is, this is a good one, right? Many scientists thought that only male birds sing. right? But when when female ornithologists went in to do research, they found that no, female birds also sing, because the male scientists were not looking at the female birds. They were not asking the question because they assumed that that is what exists. So this I think we talked about that. So what does all this mean, right? Yeah? So what this means is that none of this, many of them are theories, we need evidence. And as scientists, one of the first most important things is, even if emotionally you feel that you are equal, there is evidence. And the bottom line of all this is that we need more women to be doing research in STEM. We need more women entering into STEM. Only then will different questions be asked. Otherwise, we will ask the same question. We will assume that that women are inferior to men or different from men, and we will be asking those questions over and over again and looking for evidence to prove that. But if more and more women go into research in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or medicine, you're going to ask very different questions. Do you know research in menopause is so limited because not many women have asked questions about menopause? Till today, there is very little information available about menopause. And menopause is something that has been happening since the origin of human species. Because as long as it was dominated by one species, the questions never asked. So what I'm trying to say is that you all need to be doing research. You all need to be getting into STEM profession. So finally, I'm going to stop here. And we can have questions or whatever. Sorry, I think I might have gone well into your time. Huh? What's your time? 3:50. So we have another 10 minutes, no? 4 o'clock is the cutoff time? Good. So you have 10 minutes to ask questions and also to think about it. I mean, I've just come here for today, but this was just to sort of plant some ideas into your head, but you really need to think about it. So questions, comments, your thoughts. Doesn't have to be questions only. What did you think? Okay, what one new thing that you learnt from this conversation today? This one, women in STEM. Can each of you tell me one new thing that you learnt?
7 weeks ago.
Oh, 7 weeks embryo. Anything else? Darwin. I also was very like, yeah, that's true. Anything else? Are you inspired at all by the work that women are doing? That neuroimaging work was very interesting, no? And also the one about plasticity is for me that's very exciting, because it means that you don't have to think about getting old or anything like that. You may get old, but you can keep your brain alive, right? Isn't it? Correct. Yes, yes. That's a liberating feeling. Exactly. So we don't have to think, ayyo, vaisayo, ayyo, we can, as long as you have the thirst to learn, you can keep yourself active. But I think for me the most important thing is that unless there is a diversity of genders in research, in science, and now I'm using the word genders, I'm not saying biological sex, but unless there is a diversity of genders asking different questions, right, we will never get evidence. So in a sense, this whole classroom, I'm hoping, will get into STEM research. I don't know. Yes? No? Yeah? I mean, look at the kind of work these women have done, right? It's incredible to find out that female birds also sing. I thought that was quite remarkable, that work. And primatologists. No, I mean, you've all heard of Jane Goodall, no? Have you heard of Jane Goodall? No. Diana Fossey. So these are, Jane Goodall must be in her 80s now. But when she was very young, she was very interested in chimpanzees. So she went out into the forests in Africa, Kenya. And then after that, she worked with chimpanzees all her life. And she learned a lot about human behavior, you know. Based on her studies on chimpanzees, we understand a lot about evolution of human behavior in evolutionary biology. But before her, it was primarily male primatologists. And so most of the questions were around chimpanzees. Then as more and more female primatologists went into research, they found other ape species like bonobos and gorillas and orangutans and all of that. And then began to understand that actually our ancestors, so we were led to believe that because chimpanzees are closest to us, it's a patriarchal society, that the male dominates and gets the food and all of that sort of thing. But in the bonobos, when the women primatologists discovered that no, hey, it's the woman who is running that whole society, and bonobos are closest to us, even closer than chimpanzees, then the question is human evolution meant to be patriarchal or not? So there is science and social interface. So science is not done in isolation. Science is trying to understand the natural world, but it's also giving us information to understand ourselves, right? It's very nice to see so many young women, and I'm wishing you all the best. So I will stop here and then maybe we can, yeah? Thank you very much. Thanks.